That's great. I see David, Carson, and John's there. Okay, so we do have quorum. Great. Well then, hello everybody, and welcome. Oh, I'm just making sure that's not Francie dropping off. Sorry, I just got a text from Francie. I want to make sure she's on for quorum because we don't have Kelly.
She's here.
Okay, we're good to go. Okay, great. Well, thank you everyone, and welcome to this APCHA meeting of St. Patrick's Day, Model Sister's birthday, just throwing that in there, March 17th, 2021. Cindy, can you read the roll?
Yes. Skippy.
Present.
Francie. Francie. I know she was here.
Nancy, you are on mute. She's calling in from a Starbucks because the internet is down at her house.
I'm here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Francie. I'm in and out.
David.
Here.
John. John Ward. Carson.
I'm here.
Rachel.
I'm here.
So John is out. Rick Head.
Rick is just joining. I just admitted him.
Perfect.
Rick, we're doing a roll call.
So Rick.
She's still connecting.
Okay. Okay. And Kelly is out, correct?
Kelly will be here 15 minutes late. So
Okay.
I will let you know for the record when she's here.
Great. Okay. We're all set.
Okay, beautiful. Then we will begin our meeting with public comment. That is 3 minutes, and no particular order. I know we have a few here. So if you are here for public comment, please just speak up, state your first and last name, and I will get the timer rolling.
Hey, Skippy. It's Elizabeth Milius.
Hey, Elizabeth.
Hi. Is this good for me just to start?
Absolutely. Go forth and start.
Alrighty. Thank you. I'm calling for a variety of reasons, but was really spurred on to make this phone call today based on Alison Beck-Tesch's article today in the Aspen Daily News. I'm sure you're all aware of it. At first, I thought I would be sick to my stomach, but then I realized it's nothing new, and I was actually elated to see it on the front page of the paper, finally. As you know, I've been writing about housing and APCHA and our program for a number of years, and it's high time that the rest of the community that's not involved with APCHA is aware of what a disgrace this program has become. And they have. I've been hearing all day from people who read my work. I'm here today to ask you all specifically, what exactly is it that the APCHA board is doing? Seriously. For years, the Housing Frontiers group met, the Adam Frisch era on council. This is 5, 6, 8 years ago, came up with a comprehensive program to address the reserve scenario. Where is that? Where is that? We don't even talk about it anymore, but the reserves are not fixed. Now we have Home Track, the database. There is no leadership. There is no transparency. There is no public access. And as I wrote in my column last weekend, it's like buying a Ferrari and never shifting out of first gear. What are you guys hiding? Furthermore, where is the program census? Home Track is only as good as the data that's put into it. Okay, I know APCHA is getting ready to put its biannual affidavit out there, the same old affidavit. Why keep repeating the same mistakes over and over and over again? Did you realize that before this year's affidavit, APCHA has never asked the number of people residing in its units? It's just remarkable. I know that the census is very controversial, but if you're opposed to it, I've got to look you in the eye, and I wish I could, but I couldn't get my Zoom call to link in. What are you hiding? A census is good governance, period. Anything less shows that you don't care how broken the program is, and I know several of you don't. But we've got to fix this program. Rachel, I'm going to single you out. I read your quotes today in Allison's article, and frankly, you should be ashamed of yourself. For someone who effectively designed our housing program and lives in it, you were intellectually dishonest to Allison. Changes can be made, and they should be made immediately. Things like you could change the appreciation percentage. You could add an inspector to the purchasing process so that these issues don't happen. You could add some for-sale standards to the for-sale process. You could change the appreciation rate rules to meet those standards. And if I had more than an hour or so to prepare for this meeting, I'd come up with 25 other things that you could do today. I will, in fact, and I'll send them to you. What can you do moving forward? 50 to 60 units turnover each year in this program. Immediately eliminate the Category 1 and 2 sales. That's where the bulk of your problems are. Buy them back and rent them. Frankly, it all should be rental, but I'm willing to look at baby steps. But doing nothing is abdicating your responsibility. You had a solution. That was Mike Pozdrowski. He was hired to overhaul the program and bring it into the 20th century, never mind that this is the 21st century. You lost him over compensation issues. You can thank Sarah Ott for that. Have you noticed that the listing for his position is listed as a city department head these days? The bottom of the pay range is Mike's pay. Clearly it was personal. He was too good at his job for her. Now, my statute, yeah?
Sorry, you are over time by a minute, but I want to give you the opportunity to, you had a bunch of constructive things that we could look at in this meeting, so we'll be talking about it. So if there are specific things, and you can send them again later because this will come back, so if you want to do it that way, that would be actually really helpful. But if there are specific things that you think we should consider, I would love to hear those now. Anything that's more general, looking back at that, I would ask you to wrap.
The fact of the matter is the program, little tweaks here and tweaks there, congratulations, that's all nice and all. Until you do a census, your data is flawed. It's been flawed for generations. Until you do a census, you do not have accurate data. Do a census. You can make changes. You can make huge changes. You can make little changes. So to say you can only make changes on new units moving forward is absolute crap. And if you guys, I'm just putting you on notice, I'm going to write about this consistently now. I'm going to hold you all to account. I'm going to name names. You guys got to make some changes. This program is collapsing under its own weight, and you're sitting on the sidelines watching it.
Great. Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for taking the time. Anything that you want to send, as you mentioned?
I'm going to contact each of you. Thank you. I really will, Skippy, and I will send you very actionable items.
Yeah, I'd like to respond. I was called out directly on this, and I believe I should have a couple minutes to respond.
That's totally fine. Thank you, and thanks, Elizabeth, for your time.
Okay, thank you. What I'd like to say is that when you spend a half hour talking to a reporter, not everything you say ends up in the article. And frankly, I've already written to the Aspen Daily News to Allison because I felt I was very strongly misrepresented in one section of that, and I'm not going to go into the lengthy details on that. But I would like to say that I'm not sure if you recall, Elizabeth, but the Adam Frisch program that he had suggested for fixing the problems came at a cost of $10,000 per unit, and it had a $14 to $16 million price tag on it. That's why it was not considered the be-all, end-all to end the program. And I think you have talked repeatedly about a census, but at the same time, kind of ignore that Mike Krodowski was the one sending out those affidavits for 5 years and never asked for a census. And it's this new board that is doing so. So I appreciate your introspection on the topic as a whole. And I, again, would say that most of us know that when you talk to a paper for a half hour, you don't know what's going to come out the other end in terms of the issues. I said repeatedly, it's a puzzle. I think there's a lot of solutions. And, oh, Caroline, don't get so reacting. You don't know what's going to come out. When you speak for a half hour, they pick the best bits that they'd like. And, you know, so again, I suggested a number of solutions. I suggested ways we are going to look at trying to solve the problem. But apparently, you know, they only have so much space in each article anyhow. But if everything that any article says in the paper you think is the be-all and end-all of a conversation that's had, you're mistaken. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. I think that's very fair. Okay, looking for other public comment. Please state your name for the record.
Can I go?
Yeah, absolutely. Just state your first and last name, and then you've got 3 minutes.
My name is Brittany Shammy. I was a key component of the article this morning. So I will try and keep this really short and sweet with 3 minutes. But my boyfriend Tom and I have been completely put through hell and back. 7 months ago, we won a place that we were super excited for, that we thought was going to be great. And it has just completely gone downhill for a number of reasons. You know, guidelines are not being upheld. We're completely throwing out everything out the window, and now the seller is basically being able to profit off of his negligence and letting his property go into a state of more disrepair. So, you know, I just want to know what can be done for us. You know, we're good people. We're willing to put in the work and to make this home better, but what we're not willing to do is eat the cost. And I think that is APCHA's plan right now, is to basically pass the burden on to the next generation to inherit these costs, whether it's $50,000 or $300,000 or more, and then to go back and sell it to someone else. There was an cursory inspection that was done on our property.
She's charging $20,000 a month to me.
Guys,
If you want to take any medication, it's better.
You're not muted. If you could please mute yourself if you're not speaking. Sorry, I will not miss your time, Brittany.
So, you know, a cursory inspection wasn't done. Full valuation was given to this owner. The number of standards that are supposed to be APCHA's sales standards, and they are in his own deed restriction as well, that are supposed to be upheld, none of them are being upheld. No one's doing anything. He's not being forced to put money into escrow. He's bankrupt. This whole thing has spiraled out of control. And then on December 21st, even against us flagging that the windows in this home were frozen and other neighbors were reaching out to us telling us this, a pipe finally burst. And it's been 3 months, and we've been begging and pleading with the seller to fix the pipes, to do right, and there's no accountability. APCHA's not doing anything. There's a text here and there, but it's basically we've been thrown to the wolves. We don't have any support, and I just don't understand how he was given full appreciation, and now we're left with this property in complete disrepair that needs over $200,000. I mean, I've gone to the city for permits to understand what it's going to look like. We've pulled the scope of other projects with the same issues that they've had. I mean, these properties are 40 years old, and we're just continuing to put lipstick on a pig, and the only plan is to pass it to the next generation. And while I'm speaking out now, and I tried to handle everything amicably, we're just spinning in circles and nothing's being done. And yes, change needs to happen, and guidelines, you know, people need to be held accountable. I mean, even APCHA's own lawyer said that they have no obligation to hold him accountable, nor do they have any legal ramifications or way to do it. That seems so ridiculous to me. How can you have an organization uphold anything when you have no legal power to? It's just, I want to know what can be done for us. We've done nothing wrong and are being handed a complete mess. And, you know, there's no accountability on the staff to uphold, to do the cursory inspection, to make sure that the sales standards are met, to put money in escrow, or to make him lower the price. None of these guidelines are being followed, or these regulations. It doesn't make any sense to me. I don't understand what is happening with APCHA, with this organization.
I appreciate that. Do you have anything else? It's over time, but I really want to make sure that all of these thoughts make it into the conversation. I think it's super important. And thank you so much for everything you've sent via email and the specifics and the research. Like, it's super helpful. Is there anything in addition that we haven't yet heard that would be important for tonight?
I mean, policy change and accountability, both of them. You know, you guys have to figure this out, and something needs to be done. And I would like a better plan and solution for the people who have won and are going through it right now, because, you know, I keep hearing we can't do anything for you. Well, why?
Yeah, got it. Thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time today and before this as well. Appreciate you. Anybody else who has public comment today? One more time. Anyone else would like to comment? Okay, hearing none, I'll close the public comment section of the. Was that someone speaking up to say something? Nope. Close the public comment session of the meeting and turn to Executive Director or staff for comments.
Mr. Chair, may I share my screen?
Sure may.
Maddie, can you let me share my screen?
Yeah, I'm getting there. Just my apologies. Oh my gosh.
Thanks.
Okay, you're all set.
Thank you. That worked. And are you able to see that?
Gotcha.
Okay. Let's see. First, I wanted to just share with you that as of Monday, Bethany has been promoted to Compliance System and Policy Manager. She still owns compliance. However, it was also clear that we needed, Andrew's doing an amazing job, as is Maddie and Nicole and Rebecca and Melissa and all the people who are working on Home Track and all the APCHA staff who work in it every day. But we needed some more managerial capacity on that front. And also, it wasn't certain that we would be able to hire a new executive director that would have that capacity and orientation. So particularly in this year, Bethany's going to be spending a lot of focus on that. Like she's been doing, she's been much more involved in policy development and strategic planning. Since I joined the organization, I've really taken particularly because while I have some housing background, I don't have the background that Cindy and Bethany have in this. So we've taken a co-leadership approach to the organization. And so Bethany has been working on policy development and strategic planning. she'll still be owning compliance, but we will need to add some capacity on that front. And it really kind of formalizes work that she has been doing. And so just wanted to share that with the board. As far as the executive director goes, as you know from our last meeting, we have 27 applicants. Recruiter is screening the applicants. Right now, we have some tentative dates set up in April for both an interview and community panel. And as I mentioned to you at our last meeting, the plan is to have the APCHA board attend that, and then you'll get a unique survey just for the board that allows you to provide input on the feedback on the candidates. And our target date right now is May. The exact date of the community panel, I hope to be sharing that with you next week. We just need to know if we've got enough folks in the pipeline that are viable candidates. We don't want to start the interview process if if the recruiter doesn't feel like the pool is good enough. And with that, that's all I had for today.
Great. If anyone has any questions, please raise your little digital hands. I do not see any. I have one question for you, Diane. It's about actually the info-only memo that was in the packet. It talked about cost for the Agent Pro 247, but there was no actual cost there, and I wondered if that was intentional and coming later, or if that was accidentally left out.
Skippy, I'll do that. Sorry, Diana. I don't have the cost yet. Still trying to figure out what level of service we need. So it was accidentally left out because I was hoping I would have an answer for you, but I don't yet.
Cool. Just wanted to make sure that we weren't missing something. That's it. I don't see any other questions. So we will close. Oh,
Rachel's got a question, as Rick does as well.
Yeah, Rachel just went up. Rachel?
It's more of a request for Diane, if that would be appropriate at this time, something to look at. And we were presented, I don't know, about a year ago or so with the challenge of what we have older category units, and then we have new category units, and Mike had showed us this price delta between the two and how challenging it is. It was part of our discussion about whether people should be able to bid up more than one unit. And part of that discussion was looking at how there can be some category 4s that are older that literally would sell for about a category 3 price and things like this. And I'm just wondering if we can start to get a little bit of a grip on that, or kind of see it once again, of what we say our maximum sales price is for new units in the various categories versus what we're seeing come in for resale prices. Kind of was where there was this bit of a mismatch. And the reason I'm asking for that is twofold. One is that the Aspen City Council, in moving forward with the Burlingame 3, is trying to update our housing. I'll say the word wrong. Skippy might get me right with it. The housing
survey? Yeah,
it's a housing survey, but it was really kind of about pricing and things like that. And it just struck me that as we look at this larger problem going forward, and Elizabeth actually mentioned it, it is one of our elements in the whole equation, is the appreciation level. And it's just struck me that, if we might be selling a unit for $350,000 because it's new, and someone who bought the same category, same number of bedrooms unit might now be, with all their appreciation over many years, still so far behind what we're selling new units for. I'm just wondering if there's something there that might be part of solving the problem overall, deferred maintenance, or the
host would like you to unmute your microphone.
So
you can press star
it's just kind of an information request. And again, maybe Cindy or Bethany would have access to the older memo that had been put out. Again, it was when we were talking about why people were bidding up 2 or 3 units, and later the cost would catch up with them, unfortunately. But I just find that would be interesting and helpful in the conversation. Thank you.
I think, Diane, I heard you say someone else. I don't have any other hands up. Was there somebody else that has a comment?
Yeah, that was me. I just wanted to congratulate Bethany on her, I hope, a promotion, and also hope that there's an increase in her salary as well. She's got new housing she's got to pay for now.
True.
Congratulations, Bethany.
Thanks, Rick. And Rick, I am going to be a pain in the butt about the digital hand today because with 21 people on here, I will not be able to see you unless you're talking. So just a heads up.
I did put my digital hand up.
Thank you.
It was not recognized, so I'm butting in. Sorry.
No. I want you to butt in on this. I'm just letting you know going forward because I think this conversation is going to be dynamic later, and I want to make sure you're heard. So that's all. Great. So we'll close the executive director section of the comments and move to the consent calendar. We'll take a motion or a request for edits.
Skippy, since we don't have the consent calendar on the screen, can you let the public know what's on it for?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And staff, if you can do a screen share, that could work too if it's necessary, but it's just the minutes of March 3rd that reflect what we talked about at that meeting. There it is.
This is Kelly. I'll move to approve.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Great, and welcome to the meeting, Kelly, for the record. We've got a motion and a second. Staff, would you read the roll?
Skippy?
Yes.
John? John Ward?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Okay. Carson?
Yes.
Kelly?
Yes.
I think that's it. Thank you.
Beautiful. So we'll move into public hearings. The first thing we'll do is the second reading and hopefully adoption of Resolution 2, adopting amendments to the Aspen Pitkin County housing regulations. We're finally doing some of that. Staff, I didn't know if you have something you wanted to present, but the framework we'll just check in is just going down in the list of areas for change, 1 being grammatical and language cleanup, 2, category 6 and 7 to 5, 3, income calculation, 4, an eligibility list. We'll go in order if these sound good to anyone, and then a bucket for just anything else that we have not talked about prior to public comment. So take it away, Bethany.
Okay, good evening, everyone. We're just quickly walking through these. Table 3 was amended to incorporate category 6 and 7 maximum sales price into and establish those category 5 rental rates as we discussed in the last 2 meetings. This is a good thing. It's not a bad thing. No one's going to lose any sort of appreciation or have a lesser maximum sales price or sales price when they go to sell. A few years ago, the board had adopted this, but rental rates and the updated table was never finished, so we're kind of closing this one off. Any questions?
Seeing none.
Okay.
Oh, I got Tom raising his hand. Tom?
Tom, you're muted.
Sorry. Are you going to mention a couple of those clarifications we talked about?
Yeah, I am. I'm just going to get the Skippy's order, and then I will go back and mention, just to clarify what Tom was talking about, Tom had 2 grammatical corrections that he would like to add in, and so we don't need to have a separate hearing to talk about those, so I will mention those at the end and give you page numbers so that Maddie can scroll there and we can see exactly what he's talking about. So Maddie's got the table up. I'm going to jump now to page 17. And it's just a clarification of occupancy requirement for any unit. So no policy change was made. Staff just tried to clean up the grammatical language of it. Page 18 is the addition of the income calculation. And as we've talked about for the past few meetings, this is internal APCHA procedure that has been in our internal procedure handbook that is now being added to the APCHA regulations. Over the past couple meetings, we've cleaned up language and fixed some items that the board has requested. Happy to talk about any of them in detail if anyone has any questions.
Bethany, I had a question. Could you give me an example of other income that's referred to lower down?
Sure, Maddie, can you just scroll down?
Yeah, just went by it.
Yeah, up, Maddie, sorry, bottom of, right there, stop. To be honest, that's a catch-all. Folks get income from a variety of places that might not be listed on something like this, and so it covers, it puts folks on the record to understand that any income must be reported.
Thank you.
Any other questions on income calculation? Seeing none, let's move to ineligibility.
Okay, page 49 to 50, Maddie, is APCHA, as we've been talking about, has always had the ineligibility list as our internal policy manual, and we're adding it into the APCHA regulations. Over the past couple meetings, we have amended some of the verbiage that you have all requested, and so what you are seeing is the final version. I'm happy to talk about anything in specificity.
Questions, comments, concerns on ineligibility list? You guys did a good job. I
Great.
Rachel.
Oh, Rachel.
Oh, she also clapped. I didn't even know.
I know. I was going to say, I hit the clap button first.
You know, there was a clap button.
I like the clap button.
Although it clearly is a good job. And I apologize for missing the last meeting. But what I'm wondering, there was a section a little below this, Matt, that is the how to cure item. And what I'm wondering is, I know I had talked about it before, if someone had done things like taking an anger management class or some sort of, and I don't know if you feel that is captured in E, that any mitigating or that sounded more like if they were having, personal issues as opposed to they had sought treatment or sought to remedy the issues,
Sure. So Rachel, we had a lengthy discussion about it at the last meeting.
Okay.
And what I think, and Skippy, please correct me if I'm not communicating this correctly. The thought process is we have maybe add 1 or 2 people a year to the ineligibility list, and the request to take someone off the ineligibility list happened maybe, I think I've seen 3 in my tenure.
Okay.
So by building up any sort of list, it wouldn't be very helpful. And so we also didn't want to get too specific because it is very much up to the hearing officer at first to decide maybe what should happen. And the one thing, and I know Tom has his hand up, so he might want to add something into that, but I have to say that in past hearings so far, the hearing officer has been exhaustive in what he's requested and sort of gone down the documentation route of doing things. So we're happy to kind of have those conversations one-on-one with an individual, but each case is so different as to someone might be coming off. It wouldn't be helpful in a situation like this.
Okay, well, I will. I can support that. I can understand that. I suppose A might be something someone can show. And frankly, what I was thinking of, we're seeing this, especially during the COVID and the mental health issues that are challenging for everyone, is whether someone, had addiction issues or something like that, and they'd fallen back, but now they've been through treatment and they're back to being better. And so apparently where possible, if the reason for placing on the person on the list has been cured, that might be something that is given consideration. So I'm willing to go with it. Thank you for the explanation.
Thanks, Rachel. And I will say, I know Kelly has her hand up and so does Tom right now, but in the one I have seen where someone has, it's been a few years, they've gone away, they've come back, we've taken that letter of reference from a intermediary landlord and worked down that route to kind of see that growth, hypothetically, to come back in to our housing. So it's certainly happened in the past and it's happened well. They've come off the list for those reasons. So,
Kelly?
Thanks. I just want to acknowledge that I appreciated Rachel's ideas related to what a person might do. I think that the housing staff, could keep these ideas to sort of generate for someone. And I felt like maybe the language in C could get at that as well, the likelihood of future violations. Because I think that's really what something like an anger management class or some sort of like treatment would be demonstrating, is whether or not this person is going to have repeat behavior. I share the concern. I like the idea. The BOCC, when we talked about this, was interested in language as well. I thought that this would get to providing an officer enough flexibility whether somebody's changed behavior or maybe maturity or whatever related to their past violation. Thanks.
Kelly. Tom, I see. I'll just make one comment before you jump in, Tom, so that it can be in response to all of us. I also shared at the last meeting a desire for the slow build of some kind of list of potential avenues for cure. Not that those would be directive or that they would be complete, but just, the nature of somebody ending up on this list is they are having a hard time. And so just having something, a roadmap to look at what have other people done before, I still think would be helpful. The rest of the board and staff, for the reasons explained, did not think that was maybe the best thing at this time. And I'm happy to move along with this without that. Certainly not going to hold me up, but I just want to put that out there again in case any minds have changed between now and then. And I will go back to you, Tom.
Thanks, Skippy. So, as a general matter, this has been something that has occurred at a staff level, and after thinking about it for a while, I made a recommendation to staff that we put it in the guidelines, and the overall concern is due process. And the APCHA board sets policy for the housing authority, and it seemed appropriate that if we're going to have a set of rules that are going to affect people's rights to be in the program, that the housing board should consider that, make it a part of the regulations if appropriate, and make sure that there is due process both in people getting on the list and an opportunity to get off the list. So, in addition, there are administrative law concerns that your rules should have criteria in them so that decisions can be measured against some kind of standards as opposed to just some unspecified seat of the pants. We don't think this person is a good person or doesn't belong in the program without any criteria to base it on, and that wouldn't fly. So that's in general what this is about. And I think, as Brittany mentioned, the overall intent of these criteria, in addition to trying to provide some guidance to the decision makers, is in recognition that everybody's got their own story. Everybody's story is a little different. And so while we try to be as specific as we can, in particular, item E is a way for APCHA staff and the hearing officer to give consideration to what may be unique about some person's particular situation. And all the things that you board members have mentioned can be taken up in that regard. Item A, primarily, I think this is the most obvious example of something that would become under A is if there's a financial obligation to the housing authority. So someone can be obligated either for rent or attorney's fee award in a case or something of that nature. And it's been the practice that if somebody owes the housing authority money, we don't want them back in the program. First, because there was a reason that the debt occurred, and second, with the debt outstanding, we don't think that person is in good standing, and that's pretty much the way business is run. So that would be an example. If someone comes in and says, well, yeah, I owe APCHA because there was an attorney fee award in such and such a case, here's the money. If that's the only problem, I should be let back in the program if I solve that problem. So that's an example of what's going on there. But as I say, in general, it's about trying to provide criteria that are specific while at the same time allowing due consideration for the particular circumstances that an individual may find themselves in, including the potential for eliminating or alleviating the problems that led to them being on the list in the first place.
Got it. Thank you, Tom. So with that, guys, I'll just turn it back to the board. Is there any additional comment or question of Tom? And is there any specific request for a change based on what we've heard here? All right, I don't see any. So that looks like we are okay on that bit, Bethany. So the last, I know you have some grammatical errors you wanted to point out, and then we'll open it up for other thoughts, concerns from the board on things not mentioned.
Great. So Maddie's already scrolling to page 20. So Tom made one more read through of these today just to make sure he was comfortable with everything and identified one or two grammatical, or excuse me, three grammatical errors he wanted to point out. And so we can amend them if the board is okay with it, and we don't have to have any more hearings on it since we are stating them tonight, just as a heads up. So on page 20, I apologize, Maddie, it's page 21. The phrase through marriage is used, and we are going to change this to by a person's spouse instead of through marriage. And so that's the change. Any questions on that?
Why?
Well,
it's not clear what it means, and it could actually be limited to acquiring an interest as a right as a result of the marriage. And so this is a more accurate representation and a little bit broader.
Understood. Okay.
Tom, did I do that correctly? Your hand is up.
Can I comment, Skippy?
Yeah, only if you think it's different. If you can.
Yeah, just to clarify, through marriage could be interpreted to mean that if as a result of the marriage, you actually are put on the title to something.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's been pretty clear that the concern here is the case, and you've had cases like this in front of you, to be clear that if the spouse actually owns property, then it counts as if the person, the otherwise qualified person, actually owns it. That was always the intention, and so this is just intended to spell that out a little better.
Got it. Okay. Okay, move on, Bethany.
Sure. So Maddie's jumping us down to page 40. And Tom just wanted me to clarify a sentence so that the board was comfortable with what the sentence is. So I am explaining it on the record, but there's not going to be a regulation change. I'm not going to change any grammar. So Maddie, can you scroll down a little bit? There's some red. Yeah. So what we're talking about is income when you're requalifying. So when you're requalifying, we look at your income, and it can be up to 120% of what that category is. And so that's the amount when we qualify someone, and so they can be a little bit higher than that actual category when they're requalified. And so it's a confusing concept. We've tried to simplify it, and Tom just asked me to state that on the record tonight. So any
questions on that? Nada.
Okay, so Maddie, don't move. So in the same paragraph, we refer to composition, excuse me, of the entire unit, and we are going to add the word household. So basically, that's the whole household that's in it. So instead of composition of the unit, it will be talking about the whole household, and that's it. And I know John has his hand up, so Skippy, if you don't mind, I'm just going to ask John what his question is.
Well, I guess go back to the 120%. It made sense how you said it, but it looks like we're deleting 100 out of there. And so is it 20%? It reads 20% of the amount regularly applicable in the respective category.
You're right, John. It wasn't supposed to have that removed, so I apologize. I think we were trying to clarify it and simplify it, but I think by doing that, we actually made it more complicated. So we'll get that back in and get that change fixed so that when this gets approved, we can move forward. Sorry about that.
Thank you.
Thank you for that, John.
Okay, any other last cleanup stuff, Bethany?
Nope, that was it.
Great, so then I just turn it back to the board. You know, I heard agreement on the grammatical cleanup, category 6 and 7 to 5, income calculations, and the ineligibility list. Is there anything we haven't talked about that anyone wants to bring up, concerns, questions, or comments? Don't see the board. I do see Tom. Tom?
Just to make sure, Skippy, that you open it up to public comment at some point.
The next step, sir. Fact finding first, then the public comment, then discussion. I will get you.
Okay.
Kelly.
Yeah, I'm just a little confused about, oh, you lowered it for me, about the difference between regular case and uppercase throughout the document. For me, that's a way to like track changes, but I don't understand how it's to be interpreted if I'm reading this for the first time.
So Kelly, a little bit as a holdover from Mike. Mike liked any new changes that we're going through to be capitalized so that they were easy to be called out. And when the regulation was approved, we can certainly look at something else and a footnote instead or another approach. But it's a holdover from what we had been doing.
So like when this gets adopted, you will go in and just put that all into regular text?
No, it will stay capitalized, and anything that was capitalized will then get fixed into normal case, and anything that's fully capitalized has been a new change. It's complicated, so I'm happy with a different approach if someone would like a different approach, but just let us know.
Okay. I guess I'm just wondering because when we adopt this, it will be like version, you know, whatever adopted as of today or whenever if the hearing gets pushed forward. So unless this is explained, like, you know, right up front, and, you know, if I'm reading this, it's totally unclear to me why it's different.
I believe it has its roots in policy amendments. I don't know where. Tom has his hand up, so he might be able to assist me with that statement.
Can you help us understand why it looks the way it does?
I think Brittany is Bethany's correct that the idea is to be able to readily access and note the changes. And I think in the resolution and the copy attached to the resolution, it's fine for that to be the case. But I think Kelly's implying, if I understand, that once we go to the full set of rules, once we go to the rules as a complete document, everything should be treated the same. There is no reason in the final document, once we do a consolidation of the changes, for anything to remain in uppercase. That doesn't help anybody at that point. It just creates confusion, I think. So I would say for what's happening tonight, this makes sense, but when we later publish the amended regulations, everything should be written in the same format.
Got it. So what I'm hearing from Tom and suggested by Kelly is that for the purpose of staff being able to go back, we have an existing red line you guys will have, but for the final approved public-facing document, it will be in normal English and consistent English. Does everyone agree that, or does anyone have any issue with that, or would prefer that it remains in this oddly capitalized format? Bethany, that looks like the plan. Does that sound good to you?
Very much so. That's easy.
Great. Awesome. Thanks, Kelly. Anything else from anybody? Okay. Then this is a public hearing. I will open up for public comment on this. We don't have a list, so if you could just unmute yourself, state your first and last name. We'd love to hear any comments if you have them. Going twice for public comment? 3 times for public comment? Sold. All right, we will close the public hearing portion of this and turn it back for discussion. One point of clarification from, I'm sorry, Brittany, I see your hand up.
Yeah.
If I could reopen and ask invite Brittany to speak on this. Brittany, just state your name for the record, please.
So, Brittany Shammy, for the record. Going back to my initial comment, is anyone going to say anything or do anything about this entire case that I'm bringing forward, or when is any discussion going to happen about? So, Brittany, it's not a Q&A, but just because I know you're seeking clarity, what we're looking at right now is Resolution 2. That covers these 4 areas. This has been something we've been working on for the last 3 meetings. It is entirely separate from the standards for seller conversation, which is the next thing on the agenda. Great. Okay. Okay. So I will now close public comment. I do see Kelly's hand up, and I will state for the record that Francie has internet back at her house. She's running back there, and she's off. She'll be back in 10 minutes. Kelly?
Yeah, for a procedural point, if folks, since this is broadcast on GrassRoots, if folks are watching from home, there is a minimal 40 to 45 second delay. So, I do recommend just a pause between when you open and close the public hearing, because there will be a time lag between them seeing that the public hearing is open and being able to call in to participate in it. So I just was a little worried that we're closing this too quickly. I think enough time has elapsed at this point, but I do want to just recognize that for folks at home.
Thank you, Kelly. I was not aware of that, so I appreciate that very much. I got a hand up from Rachel.
Yeah, thank you. And just kind of, I think this is probably more Diane or staff, Skippy, but where are our meeting agendas publicized for the public to know we're having the public hearing on these items?
We did do a public
Cindy.
notice. We did do a public notice in the paper that we normally do, and then they're on our website.
Okay, thank you.
Rachel.
I just know it's gotten a little unusual with everything being on Zoom.
Totally, to say the least. Great. So just a point of order clarification from staff. This is the third meeting that we've talked about this and the second review. So are we going to vote to approve this tonight, or does this need to come back for another reading?
You can vote to approve it tonight.
Just wanted to make sure.
And there is the recommendation on the screen. If someone, and the only caveat is to make the recommendation that to make the approval with the changes that were talked about tonight. So fixing the 120 and then the two that Tom brought up.
Great. Great. Well, then I would take further discussion or a motion.
I'll move to approve resolution number 2 of 2021 with the amendments discussed this evening to adopt amendments to the Aspen Pitkin County Employee Housing Regulations.
I'll second that motion.
Great. First from Kelly, second from Rick. Any last comment from anybody? Seeing none. I'll just say very briefly to Brittany's point for anybody watching, this is the start of a long journey. We're sitting on 50 years of success and 50 years of lessons learned. There's a lot that this board wants to take on to improve, and it's going to be step by step. So not everything can happen at once. It's just reality, but it's really nice to see some forward motion. So staff, you can read the roll.
John Ward. John?
Cindy?
Did he say yes?
Maddie, can you read the roll, or Cindy, please?
They obviously can't hear me.
Oh, your music, that's right.
Can you hear me now?
Hear you now.
John?
Aye.
Rick?
Yes.
Carson?
Yes.
Skippy?
See.
And Kelly?
Yes.
Thank
Doing
you.
Things. Thank you, Cindy. Great. So we will move from that to our next item, which is standards for sellers. If you're watching at home, we've already had some comment on this. Just to offer some framework for this discussion, which is a big and important one. We don't intend to come to a final conclusion today. This is the first in what will be at least 2, maybe more meetings. The first step is going to be a presentation from staff, just sort of identifying what's actually happening, what are the current state of affairs, and then we'll have a discussion to identify as a group collectively what the problem statement is that we are hoping to solve. And then staff will present the potential tools for addressing that, what is legal or permissible, what is not. There'll be an opportunity for individual board members to make suggestions for potential means of remedying that. And then we'll give that back to staff to go investigate and come back to us with some better digested thoughts about the best path forward, which will happen at a future meeting where there will also be opportunities for public engagement and comment. And between now and then, I do invite anybody to submit ideas that you have to us or to staff via email. So with that, I'll turn it over to staff.
Hi, Skippy. So I'm going to give the presentation tonight, but before I do, Tom just wants to make a few comments, and then I will share my screen and take it back over.
Awesome.
Okay, thanks. So let me make some comments to start this off, because the legal parameters are very important to this problem, because we have deed restrictions, we have regulations, we have contracts, and the legal relationships of everybody involved have to be understood, and the limitations on legal authority have to be understood. This is on the agenda as a general discussion item, a programmatic policy type discussion. And I know that doesn't solve Brittany's problems, but if the board wants us to come back with a full-blown discussion about Brittany's situation, we can certainly do that, but we have not prepared a presentation on that. And it is a complex situation, And I will tell you that in my experience, it is a highly unusual, one-of-a-kind situation. Brittany's contract has, in conjunction with a couple of other cases, put staff in the position of trying to think ahead, because as the housing in the inventory ages, we anticipate that this type of situation is going to be more common, and we want to get out in front of it. Now, obviously, we're not out in front of Brittany's situation, but I would say that I mentioned to Diane today that I have some ideas to discuss with her about Brittany's case that maybe would help to move this to some sort of a resolution. And as I said, we can come back and address the board on that property and Brittany's contract if you want us to do that at another meeting. But as a general matter, we've got, from the legal side, we've got three players at issue in these cases. We've got an owner/seller, and we have a buyer, and we have the housing authority. And if there's going to be a solution to the problem of units being in poor condition when they're up for sale, the solution is going to have to come from one of those three, or more than one. I need to be blunt and put to rest one possible scenario, one possible solution that people may have in mind, and that would be APCHA simply requiring owners to upgrade and maintain their units to meet minimum standards. APCHA has no legal authority and no administrative ability to do that. We could not go around and simply inspect units and say, oh, you need to fix your roof or you need to add carpet. If somebody is simply an owner not trying to sell the unit, I don't see how we would have any legal ability to require somebody to do that. It would open up a whole new set of administrative burdens for APCHA, not the least of which would be having professionals on staff to address the technical aspects of the minimum standards, the costs associated with them, and then you have enforcement. And do we really want to be in the position of suing owners who are not trying to sell their units but have properties that may not at the moment of inspection meet the standards? I just don't see that happening. And so we are in a situation where we can, as you will see in the staff presentation, try to move in the direction of making owners aware and trying to encourage them to keep their units up to shape. But we do not have the authority to look at private properties and say, you got to fix it. And if somebody were to say no, there's nothing we could do about it. Now, that said, what we do now is the rules, in my view, are not adequate to give APCHA the authority to be more coercive in the process of the sale of these units. The regulation talks about a cursory inspection, but a cursory inspection is just that. And I would be hard-pressed to say that the housing authority can rely on that if there's a conflict with the seller and or the buyer about what needs to be done. We can improve the rules in that regard, but what we have now is not adequate. What typically happens now and what could continue to happen in the future embodied in rules that make it more clear how this would occur. What happens now is that when the price is set, if the property has issues, APCHA tries to mediate between the seller and the buyer an acceptable solution to certain improvements that the buyer will agree to do certain things and the seller will either live with certain things or agree to take care of them themselves, or APCHA might be in a position to say, well, we can have some flexibility with the new buyer on capital improvements and allow certain things to be added to the future resale price that may not be clearly permitted by the existing minimum standards. So this type of a negotiation has been the practice, and it has generally worked because we have not seen situations like Brittany's before. We have never had a situation where a unit requires $100,000 of work to meet minimum standards. This is highly unusual, and we are all very sympathetic to Brittany's situation. Staff and I have not tried to minimize her concerns at all, but it needs to be understood that this is a very unique problem and that there is no easy answer to it if we're going to have an enforceable solution. So what can we do besides we can improve the regulations to create more enforceable standards for reducing the sale price, but that's going to mean applying expertise to the inspection and not just an informal staff cursory inspection. We're going to have to provide an opportunity for due process if a seller wants to disagree with the reduction in the maximum sale price. Because if we try to do it unilaterally, they're either going to pull out of the deal or we're going to end up with a legal nightmare. So we can improve the rules on this. But other options would involve either placing more of a burden on buyers without an opportunity of increase in sale price, which doesn't seem quite fair. We could place the burden on the buyer with an increase in their future sale price based on their investment, but then we run the risk that the unit becomes unaffordable to future buyers. So the dilemma of the buyer's situation and the buyer's investment, it's not about punishing the buyer and forcing the buyer to make a bad investment. It's about the difficulty of finding a solution that keeps the unit affordable and in the inventory and not forcing us to, at some point, let it go free market, while at the same time trying to be fair to the buyer who is in a tough spot if the seller doesn't have the resources to actually fix the unit. Now, the problem in Brittany's case is not really what the maximum resale price is set at. We can deal with that. The big problem is who's going to pay for the improvements? If you've got hundreds of thousands of dollars of improvements that are needed, where's the burden going to be? And if we put it all on the seller, how is that going to affect and say, in a case like this, the seller might not get anything. So what happens? What happens to the transaction if we go that route? And can we enforce that against a seller who says, well, I'm not going to sell my property and not make any money. At least get my investment back.
Tom, you're getting to talk a lot.
Well, let me
ultimately, that's where it should go. Absolutely, the seller should not get to benefit from a shitty property.
Well, hold on. Let me just I'm throwing out possibilities here. One other possibility is last point I wanted to mention, which is that a possibility of there being some sort of public funding for dealing with some of these situations. And I throw that out only as an idea and not as a recommendation by any means. But when you have a seriously deteriorated unit, we have a limited number of options. And so that's the context in which I wanted to introduce the staff presentation on the scope of the problem and some potential ideas for fixing it.
Thanks. I want to open it up to questions on the legal front to anyone on the board, but I do just want to say up front, Tom, it's just a request from me. Everything that you mentioned there is super important. Everything needs to be weighed and thought about, but for me, it is very difficult to parse out which part of that is your legal advice and which part is your opinion and which part is your suggestion of solutions. Just as a for instance, at the top, you were talking about what is or isn't possible, and you were saying that it isn't possible for APCHA to intervene in maintaining the current state of the unit. But then later you talked about the extra burden on staff to do that. So now I don't know if what you're saying is there's a legal impossibility or if it's just that it would be very difficult and provide challenges. So my request would be if you could just give us the clear legal side, and then the rest of staff can fill in some of those other considerations that we need to weigh, such as, well, if you do this, here is all the reasons why it's going to be difficult, expensive, or whatever it is, but it will just make it easier for me in my head to segment those two things, which I think will be helpful. So I just want to make that one request. And I will turn to Carson.
Okay, so I guess I'll keep it to questions for Tom. I mean, I've got a lot of thoughts on this, but specifically to Tom. So Tom, we've got so what you're saying is we have in here the minimum standards, so broken windows, holes in the wall, plumbing that doesn't work, that kind of stuff. What you're saying is even though that's in the regulations, there is no ability for APCHA to enforce any of that before a property is listed for sale. Is that correct?
That's correct. I'm not, now be clear, I'm talking about outside of the context of a transaction. Okay?
Right.
I'm just talking about APCHA knocking on somebody's door and saying, we want to see if your unit meets minimum standards or not, and if they don't, we're going to tell you you've got to fix it right now.
Of course. So I guess what I'm saying is somebody wants to sell a property, and I mean those are not right. Those are not subjective things. I mean either the window is broken or it's not, and so you know I've seen instances in my own the house that I bought where there's cracks in the wall. The wall is wet, and where's the water coming from? That sort of thing where it's clearly a material issue, and yet the property was allowed to be listed for sale. And so to me the simplest fix would be to before we allow anybody to enter into a contract to sell, we just look at those things. Are there windows broken? Is the plumbing broken? Are there holes in the wall? I mean, those are not, right, that doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of, that shouldn't be too difficult to figure out. Can we do that?
Well, are you saying that before someone is allowed to list the property, they have to fix it?
Correct.
I don't know how we get there from here.
Isn't there a livability kind of requirement?
We don't have one. Now, as a practical matter, Carson, why isn't that if we have a tighter set of rules dealing with the list price connected to enforceable measures for imposing a reduction in sale price based on failure to meet those standards and authoritative, reliable reports that document the problem and put costs on it. Why isn't that a more practical solution? Because in most of these cases, the seller it's going to be more realistic for the seller to take a reduction in sale price than to put out cash in order to get the sale. It seems as if it's not a very practical solution to the problem. And I think in terms of voluntary sales, I don't know, I think isn't it more realistic to say to the seller, you know, if you have a broken window, we'll take that off the sale price, than say, go fix it before we'll accept a listing? I don't know if we can do that.
Well, I mean, you're achieving the same thing in both cases. It's just when does it happen? And I guess I was under the impression that we didn't have the ability to dictate any of that to the seller, because what has happened and what happened in mine and what has happened time and time and time again in countless stories that I've heard is, well, if you don't want it, there's 40 people behind you that'll take it, and we'll go down the list until somebody says yes. Mm-hmm. And so I guess I'm just thinking, maybe we put an end to some of that if you're not even allowed to list the property for sale until those things have been addressed. So, I mean, it's 6 and 1 half dozen the other. You could just simply say, we're going to list the property for sale. These items have not been done for whatever, an inspection, and the max price is, you know, what you can tell them the max price as is this. Now, if you fix these things, then we'll look at it again.
I think that's where we're leading in the options that staff will present to you, is putting more teeth into the enforcement and identifying consequences for failure to meet the minimum standards that we can impose successfully in these transactions, as opposed to the rules we have in place right now, which are not very meaty and do not give us much of a legal grounds to dictate this to sellers.
Got it. Well, I have more thoughts on this, but I don't want to monopolize the conversation. So,
are there questions, Carson, before I go to John and Rachel?
I'm good for now.
Okay, John.
And Skippy, just for a second. I understand that you're trying to let people ask legal questions of Tom right now to put it in a box, but I do think we're going to want to go to Bethany's presentation pretty soon. Thanks.
Yeah, I was originally planning, as we had talked about, doing Bethany's presentations first and then legal stuff afterwards, but since Tom decided to jump in, we can circle back to it, but I just figured we're here.
Okay.
Yes. I think we should let Bethany jump in and then just do a general question, Diane. I trust your judgment on this.
I think I might set a little bit of foundation, and then we can kind of get someplace, but I'm happy either way.
John, Rachel, are you guys okay with waiting a second, or do you want to jump in first? Just jump in.
Yeah, no, I have no legal questions. I have just really strong opinions that
keep those
have to tie these units to the real world to protect buyers like Brittany, right? They shouldn't have to go in and dump a bunch of money in a shithole.
Yeah, let's those comments for the end, because I'm sure they're shared, and we'll get there for sure. Rachel, before we jump on.
Thank you. Mine is a pretty legal question, which I think will help us make sure we're all using the same terminology. Tom, as you talked about it, you mentioned if the rules are changed in the regulations, and I agree with that. But what I'm wondering is, how does that then relate to the individual deed restriction contracts that people have signed over the 30 or 40 years? And I don't recall if it's exact or not, but there used to be some language we had talked about in some deed restrictions that would say that you will comply with the guidelines as they are amended from time to time. And without that language in there, that you were then held to the guidelines at the time you purchased. You didn't sign a contract that said you would accept whatever changes in guidelines came down the pike. So I'm wondering, is that what you mean by, if we change the regulations, it will then automatically impact every one of our deed restricted owners, or only some in a subset that have that clause in their deed restriction and contract? And then I guess the kind of follow-up to that would be, since we've changed the names from guidelines to regulations, have we just done something that would mess with that legality?
Okay, so no, the change in the name, to answer your first question, or your last question first, is just for clarification.
Okay.
Because they are enforceable. They're not just sort of, gee, we wish you would do this.
Okay.
Okay. As you pointed out, Rachel, and as I think everyone knows, our deed restrictions have been evolving over time, and they evolve in response to policy changes, but also in response to problems as they arise. Currently, the minimum standards are part of, they're an attachment to the deed restriction, and they're referred to as a requirement of the deed restriction. In those cases, I don't think we've got any issue on enforcement. In other cases, we're going to have to look at what the actual deed restriction says. We are going to try, I would think we would want to make rule changes regarding the minimum standards as broadly applicable as we can make them. But some deed restrictions will be such that we will probably not be able to do that with all of the properties. In cases where it's clear that changes to the rules apply, then yes, I believe we can enforce that. In other cases, we're going to have to look at the language of the deed restriction and see what we can do. But this isn't a new issue in the broad sense. I mean, we have to deal with this frequently when we attempt to enforce new rules. So, for example, some of the older deed restrictions, it's not even possible to enforce the prohibition on ownership of other property because of the way those deed restrictions are written. So we have to deal with this in other contexts. We'll have to deal with it in this context, and we just do the best we can to enforce the new rules in as many cases as possible.
Okay, thank you. And I guess the follow-up would be, as we try to move forward with the conversation, is to be able to use HomeTrek to perhaps group our former deed restrictions in some sort of historical light. You know, the ones that were issued last year are probably good. The ones 5 years ago are probably good. And the ones maybe 20 years ago, people haven't moved, maybe less good. But I think we have to start de-aggregating the big problem into smaller problems and deal with them each as we need to. And, you know, just a final word, and I won't monopolize, but I have a niece down on Denver on the Front Range, and I'll tell you, trying to find anything under 400,000 there, they have a line of buyers as well. And people may be overpaying for their properties there, and then have deferred maintenance, and then they have a hope that they can flip it and sell it and regain some of that. But at the same time, look back in our own valley 9 years ago during the recession, and we had bankruptcies throughout the free market, throughout the valley, because people's property values fell so much. And that isn't really something most owners see in the affordable housing program, although I do think their prices should be reduced for these sort of issues. But I'm just saying, they've gone in multiple times, looked at the problems of houses. Anyone can read about it, and it's a seller's market down there. So a lot of people are taking on things they can't fix. Also, I guess at our last meeting, we talked, John Ward, about how you might be able to allow the new buyer the added cost of the renovations into their purchase price. And I think the real challenge is for Carson, as he has suggested, if you just reduce the purchase price to the new buyer, they're set with a new lower appreciation level from there on out. And it could actually affect how much capital they can put into the project and things like that. So, you've kind of solved it on one turn of the project or property. I'm not sure you've solved it on every turn if it's just a reduction in price. I'm just not sure. I think we need to look at that. And I guess one last kind of thing for our conversation here, looking on the APCHA website, there's a Midland Park category 4, 2 bedrooms, advertised for $189,000. And in our same guidelines, we say that a Category 4 two-bedroom new construction, a maximum sales price is $336,000. So there's a real difference there between what that one Category 4 buyer might be able to afford, but they're going to need to put more money into the 189 unit to try to bring it up to more modern standards. Unfortunately, they can't wrap it into their first mortgage, and it's only like later we're saying maybe we could allow capital or these sort of improvements to be added. So there's just a lot of factors. I think we need to really start mapping out all the factors that influence this to try to reach some equity on it. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. Francie, I don't know if you were back in, but staff is going to start their presentation, so I do want to give you the opportunity to jump in here, but we want to go to staff and then come back for questions if this isn't something.
problem.
Okay, cool.
Fine with that.
All right, so Bethany's going to jump in, guys. I'll just ask so that we can try to get to, because we're, it's 6:20, and we'll keep moving this forward, but if you keep in mind as Bethany goes, A, kind of your definition of the problem that we want to solve so we can all agree on that at the end of the meeting. And then B, just list out any fixes or tools or whatever you want to call them that you would like to see staff work on before the next meeting so that we can get a list going. Thanks, Bethany.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Everyone see standards for sellers? Great. Okay, I'm going to go quick so that you all have a fair bit of time to continue your robust discussion. So just to kind of backtrack a little bit and talk about kind of what the history is and what is the actual problem that staff is proposing. We have an aging inventory of units. Sellers believe that they are guaranteed maximum sales price. No detailed pre-inspections of the unit by APCHA or other inspector. Yes, there is a pre-COVID, there was a APCHA staff member that would walk through the unit, but they are not an inspector. It was more a general look of the unit. Some owners have completed little upkeep of their units and let them fall into disrepair. And there's a seller's market. There will be a buyer in most situations because it can keep going down the list of lottery winners. So again, Tom talked about this briefly, but how is the problem resolved today? Sellers and buyers are left to negotiate credits at closing or repairs by the owner with APCHA staff acting as an intermediary. Significant staff time is spent on these negotiations, certainly upwards of 120 hours if a unit is in disrepair. Again, these are not common. Buyers usually close feeling dissatisfied with the concessions that the seller has provided. I'm running through these, but we'll keep going. So Tom talked about legal authority already. Deed restrictions do not necessarily guarantee maximum sales price. However, we can't do much about that. Minimum standards are part of the deed restriction, but do not specify consequences for failure to comply. APCHA regulations can clarify and implement deed restrictions, but may not be consistent. So, and then a fair process for establishing sales price in accordance with due process, including an appeal process, would be consistent with any principles of administrative law. So some ideas and suggestions to alleviate the problem. Again, these are just some that staff has thought about with Tom over the past couple weeks. Inspections, we could do periodic inspections, let's say every 5 years, where ownership units are inspected and sellers are notified as to what might need to be fixed. However, we can't require that fixed. We could also require a actual inspector, certified inspector, to come in pre-sale. We can do things with pricing, such as reduce list price, establish a fund to assist parties with financing of necessary improvements. I wouldn't be paying, but financing, and then flexibility as to the buyer's future resale price for our buyer funds improvement. So, for example, if someone were to buy a home at $300,000 and the max sale price for a brand new unit in that same category was, let's say, $50,000 more, allow the buyer to put in, up to $50,000, and so that higher amount of, let's say, $350,000 would be where their appreciation were to start. So again, just some general ideas to get the conversation started, but I know you all have some ideas and have already started to talk about those. And that is the end of my presentation, so I'm going to turn it back over to Skippy. Happy to answer any questions on that, but I tried to go quick so that you could talk.
Thank you. Let's get all questions out first so we have the same information, then we'll jump into opinions and recommendations, please. John Ward.
I bet John had opinions and not.
I bet he did too.
I have strong opinions and no recommendations or no questions at this point. Sorry.
I'll make sure you're first with opinion. Anyone else questions? Okay, I have a couple questions then. We've talked about the altering of the sale price in some way as a means to remedy this. So either lowering the sale price so that the delta can be captured by the buyer to do the improvements, or making the seller make those improvements first. Of course, the problem in there is that the buyer may not have the money to do those things, and they're taking on the workload for the poor behavior of the previous tenant. So I'm wondering, I know that there will be concerns about staff time and all this other stuff, the dollars themselves, but is there a solution where APCHA steps in as the intermediary whereby, the buyer buys it at the max sale price, but the seller can only capture the reduced rate? APCHA steps in the middle to do the improvements themselves, hands it over to the buyer, and APCHA keeps the delta so that APCHA is made whole for those fees, and the buyer does not need to do it themselves or deal with that problem. Is that something that is legally possible? I'm not asking about the other considerations.
So APCHA would essentially buy the unit, and then I think in practice what would happen is APCHA would buy a unit, make the repairs, and then send it to lottery. So there wouldn't be that buyer, there wouldn't be a lottery run initially. But it all hinges back to that, what we're going to give to that seller as to their max sales price.
Yep, understood that, but so okay, that's possible. And then second question I have is, Rachel pointed out a great example with the category 4 2-bedroom at 189 versus 336. Does staff have thoughts to share on how we square that reality that pre-exists with the proposed solutions in a static state environment, if that question makes sense?
What are you asking again? It didn't really make sense to me. So if you could...
All right, it's a confusing question.
Well, let's talk about that one unit really quick. My guess on that unit is one that has never really hit the market, has never had any capital improvements or anything done to that unit. And so the buyer in that unit has a fairly sizable delta that if they bought it, they get, hey, I want to replace the cabinets, I want to replace the counter, I want to replace the carpet. I want to do a lot of things that, in all honesty, are purely maintenance issues, but they could recoup their costs in that unit, correct?
Yes, the buyer could.
Up to a certain level, right?
Up to a certain level, yes, up to a certain level.
And that cap is, in this case, is probably fairly significant because that unit has had no work done to it ever, in most reality.
Yes, and it would be a new deed restriction, so the deed restriction would likely say 10% plus any other fixes that are outside of like health and safety or energy efficiency.
Okay, so that's part of that delta, right? That's part of that inconsistency in sales price today.
Yeah, and I guess so. Yes, John, that's helpful for me, that consideration. But I was just asking: has staff thought about that problem? In that, like, let's just say there's a newer Category 4 unit that has been left in disrepair, even though it hasn't been around for a while. So the delta between the new unit and that one is not super huge, and so the solution in that, what I would call static state environment, right? It's pretty new, they're pretty similar, would simply be to adjust the sales price. But then you have these other examples of older places where the delta is really huge. And so one could make a case that in those type of situations, perhaps that step in for the sale price is not necessary because this higher category person is buying a really cheap to them unit. So I'm just wondering if staff has thought about the interplay between those realities.
I would say we have thought about it, and essentially the APCHA regulations, as they are, have a max sale price for a brand new category unit. And so what we've been looking at through this process is saying, okay, a brand new Category 3 can sell for this. And so, what is that delta, and allowing someone to hit that delta and then start appreciating from there, obviously showing receipts and whatnot. So we have started talking about that, but we're tied to the regulations right now and what that number states, and don't necessarily, at the moment, we can't operate outside of that.
Understood. Those are my questions, and now I see a bunch more. I'll get to all of you. Kelly.
Sorry, I was on mute. I just really want to caution on making assumptions here. And I think that, for example, I am not going to assume that Midland Park unit has not had lots of work done to it. I think a person lived there for a long time and quite possibly took good care of it. And for whatever reason, which I could guess, is now in the position for that unit to be sold. And, I think that we need to really take a step back and, ask some bigger scale questions related to this problem, such as what is APCHA's and the community really commitment to an ongoing subsidy for units that have been built in the past. I think what is APCHA's role in these transactions also is an important question to ask. There's been some ideas thrown out related to that I think can open up a huge can of worms that could be compromising for APCHA. And I think we need to understand what the consequences are for different possible paths. So, for example, what is the consequence if you reduce the maximum sales price for a seller? What is that consequence? There is a floor to that. For, in Bethany's case, it's quite possible that all of the seller could get nothing, and there's still money on the table needed for a unit to be livable. So that's just a consequence to that approach. There's a floor. There's also a consequence to if you allow the price to get increased and you tag on the cost of repairs, such as you were just talking about. What does that do for the inventory over time? So, I am not in a position tonight to say, staff, I want you to pursue this possible solution and run with it and come back to us. I think we need to really flesh out what all the different questions are that might arise from trying to tackle this problem. And what is our role in it? And what is the community and the subsidy that is ongoing with it? So, that's where I'm at. I'm having a lot of reactions to all the ideas I'm hearing, and I don't have a framework that we've created with which to consider that.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. And I think we'll have ample time to do exactly that. I mean, I think that's what these meetings, plural, will be for. So I appreciate that. Rachel.
Yeah, thank you all. And thank you, Kelly. I think those are good comments. This is a complicated issue, and that's why I'm saying we have to deaggregate it, start pulling the strings apart and looking at where they are. There is a big price difference between a new unit and some of these older units that haven't resold. The main reason the price is lower is because someone lived there for 30 or 40 years, not necessarily because they kept it up or didn't keep it up. You know, I see that all the time in Hunter Creek. Units the exact same size of mine could sell for $100,000 more because they sold 6 times and reset the basis for appreciation every time they did, and my basis for appreciation is still $64,000 back in the day. And so that would also kind of point out, you know, there are a lot of little things in this. One I want to point out is that we've been talking about raising the seller's commission rate from 2% to 3%, a 50% increase to fund APCHA operations. Whereas, if anything, I'd consider increasing it to 4% if all of it went into the HOA reserves for that project or something else. The second thing is we really need to separate out the whole HOA, larger capital reserve issues, and this interior livability standards, because, you know, we allow this 10% for capital improvements. And I think people get a little confused with that. Is it for aesthetics? You know, when somebody replaces their cabinets and the cabinets weren't broken, it's because they like the look of a new cabinet and they want their kitchen to look really modern. That's not a capital improvement. That is an aesthetic choice. Now, if you add additional cabinets and increase the space within that kitchen, then they'll give you credit for it. I have seen the 3-bedroom Category 4 units in my building turn over repeatedly. And one of those was a free market unit that was bought down for mitigation. And that free market owner had just gutted it and done the floors and the kitchen and everything. It was beautiful. The next buyer redid it themselves. And the next buyer redid it again. And the same thing happened to the other 3-bedroom, where I thought they spent $12,000 on a kitchen that I never would have spent. And the next owner decided to paint the cherry wood. You know, I mean, you have to realize there's challenges here. If somebody says the carpet's done, is it done because they don't like the green that the owner had before and they want a white carpet? And should that owner replace the carpet before they sell, or is it better to leave an allowance for the next person? You know, so there's real challenges of what people think of as livability standards. I came in from a family that would never get a new stove unless the old stove broke. And we have neighbors who would get a new stove every 5 years because there were new features. And we have to be careful about that. What is an aesthetic choice that someone's making? Or what I'd rather, I mean, I moved into this Hunter Creek with fluorescent industrial lights in the bathroom and the kitchen. And I've replaced those, but I do not expect that it will be added to my sale price. You know, it just was that. But I think that there's a longer course here. There may be that investment is needed, public dollars, as Kelly is saying, on some of these to bring them to a certain point. And then they will need to be bought back down again to satisfy the categories where most of our workforce really resides. And so I think there's a full cycle here, a full circle that's going to happen. There's no one strategic fix or 2 or 3 rule changes. And so I do agree with looking at the program as a whole. So those are some of the challenges I see. I do think we need to be able to separate out what is aesthetics and what is maintenance and what is maintaining. Maybe you don't like the avocado green refrigerator because that was the style 10 years ago, but does it still work? Will it work? Does it have another 10 years on its useful life? If it doesn't, then we need to do something. And the bigger question I've been really thinking about, folks, is that when someone buys, a new buyer, and pretend it's a new unit, should they be told that they need to start a separate escrow account because we've determined that the entire construction cost of that unit needs to be replaced over 50 years. And that they should be paying into some sort of escrow account or something so that they're not caught at the end with a $20,000 roof replacement or these other large things. Should they literally be told, look, the house costs $200,000, but if you're there for a full 30 years, we want you to replace the house. Because I think we're slowly getting up to those standards. And the truth is, as Adam Frisch said when we got to the end of our last capital reserves go round, maybe we need to rethink putting people in homes that cost $600,000 to build and sell it to them for $250,000, and then think that they can maintain a $600,000 piece of construction. And we've gotten unrealistic about what people's wages will allow them to actually do in terms of keeping up their homes. So I think there's a lot of bigger philosophical things we need to go around on this. And I guess the last comment I'm going to make is that how the money is spent would be critically important. You could say someone can increase their sales price by $30,000. It's hard to imagine, other than the case that we've heard about, a couple of cases of, as Thomas said, who seem to be incredibly unique, that you would, if someone was allowed to increase their sales price by $30,000, it would have to go for things that aren't going to be replaced yet again in 10 or 15 years. You'd have to watch, are they spending it on new blinds because they didn't like the old blinds? Were the old blinds broken? Had the cords gone? I'm going to leave it there, but this is what I'm saying is that, any quote increase in someone's sales price, you're then going to have to verify and want to verify how every last penny was spent if they're adding it to their sales price. Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel. I appreciate that. Really good comments all around. Carson, your hand was up for a while. I know it's getting late in the meeting. We're obviously going to continue this to the next one, but your hand was up for a while. So did you have something you wanted to add?
I think what I was going to add is, Rachel touched on it. We didn't do the HOA. We didn't do the HOA concerns. I mean, obviously that's a huge piece. I mean, you could have the whole project. I mean, that's the foundation, the walls, right? We've seen that with some of the other projects in town. It certainly needs to be addressed. I guess I'm just sort of just thinking about this, and rather than trying to solve it, I just sort of tried to step back and maybe think about why hasn't this been solved, right? I mean, it's clearly a problem. Rachel just mentioned, this is the second or third or fourth or right however many times that people have been looking at this, and I think this is going to be a very controversial topic because the projects some are old, some are new, they're not the same. Trying to come up, I don't know how many projects we've got in the whole system, but it's a lot. And so, just thinking about it, we do have you're going to have a lot of people that are going to be on both sides of this thing. A lot of people are going to like what happens, and a lot of people are not going to like what happens. And so, two thoughts, that I'll raise, and I've been clear about, my thoughts on independent APCHA, but, one being, certainly me being in deed restricted housing, is it a conflict of interest for me to be making decisions on these properties? I mean, eventually, right, I'm going to sell my property. So, that's one concern. And then two, being an elected official, if you've got a situation where you're going to have a lot of unhappy constituents, that's a real concern too. So, for me, really just trying to think about why hasn't anything happened in the past, and those were sort of two thoughts that just came across my mind when I was thinking about it.
Thanks, Carson. Guys, we will obviously pick this up at the next meeting and meetings, I'm sure. But I want to do a check-in on process. Kelly made some comments about making sure we're looking at the broader picture. Rachel talked about a lot of the nitty-gritty that we will dig into. And so I kind of wanted to circle back and take any suggestions from either of you and then everyone else as well on process. My thought, and Kelly, I think maybe I was not clear in that, was not that we at this meeting or even the next one would say, this is the path we want, staff go work on it, but rather, the first thing we would do is group define a problem, right? This is what we want to solve for. Yes, we agree. Then, okay, here are the variety of tools that can be brought to bear into this. Here are the 2 or 10 or 20 that we want to consider. And once in consideration, that is where we could dive into all of those details, unintended consequences, nitty gritty, et cetera, and then ultimately make some decisions on where we wanted to go. So that's how I was thinking about it, but I want to be open to any process that would be better. So do you or Rachel have thoughts on that first, and then I'll open it to anyone else?
Skippy, for me, I think we have to start mapping out and have it on paper, and then each individual issue or circumstance as we talk about it that's going to go into the mix and go into the solution is in one place, and maybe they can start to be categorized, but otherwise the ideas and the issues are just going to keep circulating and circulating like a cow chewing its cud. And I mean, I think there's nobody here on the board who doesn't entirely agree with John Ward's comments, and I'm going to try and do a little follow-up with Tom Smith afterwards to see where this is going and how unique and how non-precedent setting we might be able to make some action because it is such a unique circumstance. But for me, it's more about starting to outline it as you were doing, Skippy, in a way of talking about the problem description. Let's start listing all the factors that come into play on this so we can see what the path is out.
Got it. And Rachel, you may have a suggestion on this, but let's say that, because I'm just trying to translate that into action for us. Let's say that individual board members take some time to think about that and either come back to the next meeting in 2 weeks or maybe even submit written to staff in such a way that they could be compiled for a packet. Like, do you have a way that you think that would be best addressed?
I think that perhaps through our conversations, we can start coming up with categories and the titles of the issues. I mean, one of them is the, we're not really talking about new units. We're talking about older units and finding out the data from Home Track of how many units do we have out there that haven't turned over in 30 years? How many units do we have of this age? I mean, let's start using hard facts and figures and data to take a look at this. And also costing out some things. I mean, it's not that much to say, okay, what if we were able to get a professional inspector on staff and then go back to both the city and the county for more money for this? But all these issues, I believe we really need more professional guidance and some dedicated staff. It's just like us asking ComDev to change the codes on affordable housing and things like this at the city level. It's taking them months of working on it behind the scenes. And we are a citizen board at best. And that's all. I think that we should think about what sort of resources we may need as a group to define and then offer potential solutions. Thank you.
Thank you. John.
I guess I thought I put my hand down, but just opinion-wise, and I've said it a lot, but I have no interest in a deal where a seller who was irresponsible in their property didn't take care of it, then maintain it, got the benefit to live in essentially subsidized housing for however many years they lived in it, let it deteriorate, and then they believe they can sell it at full list price, full appreciation to some poor soul who wants, another working family or working individual that wants to move, wants to secure a future in Aspen, in our area, to have to eat that. To me, that's not fair to the next person coming in. We've talked about subsidies. We've talked about other, the HOA assessments and HOAs that were negligent in taking care of their properties. And, I brought up the example, from a few years ago where, I had a friend of mine bring me out to his units, highly desirable location, great units. And he wanted to get his HOA on board to replace the roofs that were 20 plus years old. And one of the comments from one of the owners of that property was, why would I spend the money to replace the roof to benefit the next person? And I ultimately believe each and every one of us that lives in housing, and I live in, North 40, and I believe, and I think we all should have the same idea, was all of us, all owners are stewards of this property. And, Elizabeth brings up some great points, maybe the lower level category that you're talking about that costs $600,000 to build, and we're going to sell it to $100,000 or $400,000 to build or whatever. They should be rentals, and they're affordable rentals. The fire district is going to own the stuff that we're building, because I believe that we should have rentals and we can maintain them and take care of them and be the adults in the room to make sure we're passing on housing for 50 years. And this is only getting worse. The time bomb's ticking. You saw how really we did the low hanging fruit on some of the regulations, but those aren't important. This is important. This needs to get taken care of.
Yeah, thanks, John. Okay, guys, so we will close the Tom, I see you. I will come to you.
Please, Skippy.
We'll come to you. Just give me a second, Tom. So we will close loop, and we'll bring this back next time. Next time, I would like to start with sort of agreement on the problem statement. So whether you want to just come prepared with thoughts, or you want to circulate those to others or staff via email for consideration ahead of time. I think if we can get a line there and then begin to start talking about potential solutions, that'll put us in a good place. Last question I have before you, Tom, is just, Francie, I haven't heard from you at all today, so I just wanted to make sure if there's anything you wanted to jump in, and same to David Loughran.
I did have some questions, but they've come up from other people, so I feel quite satisfied. Thank you.
Great. And David, did you have anything you wanted to add before we roll off today?
Yeah, no, I think this discussion has been a great start. All we've really come to see is that we're standing in the middle of a big mud puddle at the moment that needs to be cleared out. And I'm very, very personally upset about what's happened to Brittany and her husband with this property. Knowing how much it means to have a place to live in Aspen, and to be really sort of dumped on by whoever this seller is. I just think we need to address this quickly and very clearly. It's not something that can linger on as a problem in APCHA.
Thank you. Rachel, last comment? You're on mute.
I was waiting for board member comments, Skippy, and I'll wait till after Tom Smith.
Tom, you want to just wrap us out with anything necessary? And of course,
I want to respond to some of the comments, especially John's, just so we don't have a misunderstanding about where we are right now.
Thank you.
But first, process. Let me comment on process. It's entirely up to the board. Let me start by saying that what process you want to follow. But I have represented state agencies and as well as local government agencies my entire career in rulemaking proceedings, which is what we're kind of talking about here if we're going to do something. And in my experience, the most efficient thing to do is for the decision makers, which in this case is all of you on the board, to tell us what you want, to tell us what you think the issue is, and some potential solutions, and for staff to come back with a draft of potential rule changes. And in the context of looking at rule changes that are in writing, and I'm not saying it's in the form, even necessarily in the form of a recommendation, but just something in writing that is intended as a set of potential rules. Some will be inconsistent, you'll want to follow some, not others, whatever. But having a set of rules in front of you, in my opinion, and based on my experience, is much more efficient than having general discussions about the problem.
Mm-hmm.
But it's up to you. Now, let me comment a couple things where I think I don't want to have any misunderstandings. I think, John, you brought up a point about buyers getting reimbursed in some way or having some sort of, given some sort of consideration in connection with expenditures for bringing a unit to minimum standard. We have absolutely nothing in our rules right now that provides for any consideration to be given to a buyer in connection with one of these transactions. Nothing. In connection with sellers, our rule refers to a quote-unquote cursory inspection. And one of the problems is if we're going to actually put teeth in the possibility if we're going to put teeth in reducing sales prices below minimum standards, we can't do it based on cursory inspections. We are going to have to bring expertise to bear and make defensible decisions with input from construction or building professionals so that we are reducing prices in a way that is defensible and not seat of the pants, oh, we think this will cost $1,000. So we don't have those two things in the rules right now. A third thing, and John, I think this is important to understand, the deterioration of these units is not always based upon poor stewardship. Normal wear and tear reduces the quality of any housing over time. Doesn't require a bad actor for some of these issues to arise. And one of the reasons we're bringing it up is precisely that, because normal wear and tear is going to result in deterioration of these units, and sellers don't always have the ability to make the payments for that. And if we're going to say, sorry, your price is down by $50,000, you're going to get pushback. And so we've got to have something in the rules that makes it a defensible decision. Otherwise, we're just going to create a bigger problem than we have right now. So an escrow account is a great idea, but that's a major change in the rules. And it imposes an expense on property owners that, I don't know, are they prepared for that? Do they have the financial ability? So there are a lot of things here, a lot of moving parts in all of this. And as I say, at some point, I think it will be, in order to bring things to a head, the best thing will be to have the board direct staff to come in with some options for actual rule changes, and you can shoot at those. And then you've got something concrete that you're dealing with.
Thanks, Tom. I appreciate it. John, if you want to just quick respond, and then I want to be respectful of everyone's time, get through board members' comments.
Oh, I get that. I apologize. I don't disagree with the normal wear and tear, Tom, but I also understand that and housing deteriorates over time, and every owner needs to understand that. So, like I mentioned, the example with the roof, roofs need to be replaced. They need, a buyer of the next unit should take on, maybe it is HOA assessment or whatever to continue to take care of that payment on that new roof. Refrigerators go out like, Rachel talked about floors and carpet need to be replaced. Those are all things that should be done at some point. 20 years, they should be done. You know, a new buyer can maybe choose carpet. Maybe they like the carpet that's in there, but I get it. I get the normal wear and tear, but ultimately, a lot of that stuff over time should be taken care of.
Thanks, John. Great. So thank you guys all for the beginning of a really robust discussion. We will get through all of this, and what I hear universally, which is great, is a commitment to do something, and that's the first step. So with that, I'll move to board member comments. They are optional, and Rachel is up first.
Yes, thank you all. I really just wanted to take a moment to address the newspaper story in the Aspen Daily News today, and I particularly appreciate that Brittany is still online. I spent a goodly bit of time talking about the multi-facets of the problem that we are facing. And in the course of that, I talked about the one item we've all talked about tonight, the older units that someone hasn't sold for a long time and will be a very different price delta from the new units that are coming online. And in the course of talking about that challenge, and that there may be some potential solutions within that challenge of adjusting price or working through that, I had said that when people buy a much older unit, they are getting a deal, but they're also getting a lot of deferred maintenance. That comment was not in relationship to any of the two cases that were being made. It was made in the context of one example of the challenge of dealing with of interior maintenance issues. It was not at all addressed to what are outlandish problems that we're seeing with some of these sales, and it was radically shortened. Again, it was part of probably a 4 or 5 minute discussion about that issue, and that I thought there were potential solutions within that price gap, but that a 30 or 40-year-old unit will never be made entirely new. And that's all. I really felt, and the very first thing, I saw someone come into my work today, and they said, what a horrible problem with the housing. And I said, yes, it sure is. And it's really complex, and we're working on it. And they said, yeah. And then I said, you know, I have to say, I thought I was a little misrepresented in the article because of this issue. And I said, I thought it made me sound very callous, and that I wasn't concerned about the issue. That I'm like, hey, you got a great price. Who cares if you had a lot of deferred maintenance? And they said, yeah, that's how they read it. And I just want to say that's the challenge of speaking as an elected official. You never know what part of your statement they're going to use, or even just half of, or one line or half of a line out of a 3-paragraph discussion. And some are better than others. Will be easy to say that, and some are much more trusted. But I just wanted to say I didn't want that to sound like I was dismissing the problems that are real and were fully discussed in the article, and they certainly were not. I hadn't even heard her discussion about those two cases in the article. I was just asked to discuss the issue overall as someone who lives in A.H. So that's all. I just wanted to say, and if anyone has taken it that wrong, who's dealing with these problems, I apologize. It was not the comment. It was not in regards to the larger whole problem. It was a small subset discussion in which that quote was pulled. Thank you.
Rick?
Yes, thanks, Rachel, for that clarification. I just wanted to address John's concern regarding replacing roofs and things. A lot of these are captured in the capital reserves that most associations should be accumulating to address those problems. The only other thing I wanted to say is I wanted to acknowledge Elizabeth and some of the concerns that she had raised in her opening remarks. And I'm leaving the board in 4 months, and I would encourage her to apply for this position if she's really interested in becoming part of the solution process.
Thanks, Rick. Appreciate that. Kelly.
I'm going to pivot to totally different topics right now. Relevant for, you keep lowering it when I go to lower it.
Sorry.
So 2 things that I want to bring up is I have concerns, and Francie and I were chatting, related to when people need to requalify and have to look back on this last year for their requalification process. Just considering, the loss of work of folks and the loss of health, people who've endured health issues and have not been able to work perhaps the 1,500 hours in this last year. And so I want to make a space to have a conversation related to that about how to deal with it. I recognize that there's been recessions and things in the past, so I don't know how APCHA has dealt with this in the past but it's a topic of concern that is important. And then we also identify that there's probably some education for me and maybe other board members too, related to if somebody just sort of generally experiences a health issue, how that's treated in their requalification process. So I'll just leave that for that. And I guess I'll ask, if we can find some time on a future agenda for that discussion. And I also wanted to bring up, there is a bill in the legislature that is being promoted by the Department of Local Affairs, Division of Housing, and therefore has the support of the administration, and Pitkin County is supporting it, related to not requiring lawful presence documentation for people to be able to access housing. And this is a change, and it has precluded the ability for people in our community who cannot prove lawful presence, but maybe have children who are here, have been born here, and obviously can't procure housing on behalf of their family. So I just want to inform everybody that is moving, and I'm not sure that we should just keep our eyes on that to see if that changes who can apply for APCHA housing. And we can come back to a further discussion on how that affects our rules and everything later, should it pass and get signed by the governor. And that's what I have.
Thanks, Kelly.
Skippy, before we move on, sorry, would you be okay if we just added the question about requalifications, because staff has discussed this and there have been accommodations during COVID. So would you be okay if on the next agenda we just put it as a quick item to cover?
Can you explain a bit more about what that would entail and how much time it would take?
Sure. Kelly, what Kelly just requested on discussing how staff approaches requalifications for folks who've been affected by COVID, and I'm guessing it'll take 5 minutes if we don't have questions.
Yeah, if it takes 5 minutes, I have no idea what the scope of the conversation is. So, is that everyone else comfortable with that? I'm fine with that. That looks like a yes. Thanks. Dan.
Thank you.
Anyone else comment? Seeing none, I'll just make one quick comment, really for the board, ourselves. We have an ambitious agenda ahead of us. There's a lot of complicated problems that we want to solve. It's beautiful that we want to solve them and are willing to step into action. And it's going to be a bit messy, especially at the beginning. Process is super important, as has been pointed out today. And generally, different people have different needs or desires in process. So it won't be perfect on the first go. But what I hope to foster is a iterative process where I am regularly taking feedback from you and bringing that into the process so that over time we can get something that better and better serves each of your needs and thus the board's and community's needs. So I just want you to know that that is my intention and my approach. And as we move through this, anytime there are things that aren't working for you or thoughts for how to improve it, please, my request is, don't complain about it to the family at night. I mean, you could do that too, but please bring it to me. And so we can incorporate that into an ever improving process to get things done. And that would be very appreciated by me. So that is all I wanted to say. With that, I would take a motion to adjourn. Sorry, about 12 minutes late, but stuff to do.
I'll make a move to adjourn.
Francie speaks. Yeah. A second?
I'll second.
Make the motion for you, because as an alternate, I don't think you can move. But I will move for us to adjourn.
Thank you.
Carson, do you accept that amendment, friendly?
John seconded.
Oh, John was John. All right.
Yeah, I'll accept the motion.
Staff, would you read the roll?
Can they hear me? Yes. Can you hear us? Can you hear us?
Staff?
Okay, Skippy? Skippy?
Can't you just do a voice vote on
I'm sorry, you can't hear me?
Well, you could if you were in person, but
We can't on the Zoom machine.
register any kind of a vote when you're set up like this. You know?
Can you hear me now?
Gotcha.
Okay, Skippy?
Yeah.
Kelly?
Yeah.
Carson?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Rick?
Yes.
And by the way, just to remind you, there's 5 Wednesdays this month, so we do not have a meeting until April. We have 2 Wednesdays off.
All right. Thank you, everybody, very much.
Schedule an extra one?
What?
I mean, can we schedule an extra one?
No.
I mean, to me, this discussion really calls for a retreat or something. You know.
Right, John, that's kind of what I was saying. You know, let's line it out. Let's get the facts. Let's get all sorts of stuff. I agree with what Tom Smith has said. Let's look at some draft language to spit around and see what other communities have done. But it's going to take longer discussions and either meet at 4 till 7 or add an extra day or when the new director is selected and comes on, you know, having a couple of full days retreats on some of these major topics, I think is better than slow pizza death, you know.
I'm open to any and all of that, guys. So whether it's staff or me, if you want to just shoot those ideas by email, I can try and coalesce.
I'm about ready to just end it.
All right.
Well, we're adjourned. I think that was off the record discussion.
Great. Thank you.
Goodbye.